I'm Dr. Stephanie Hayes, and I'm a clinical psychologist at Algoma Family Services. Today I'm here to talk to you about self-care. Now, I heard those eye rolls all the way from here, but I hope that I can make a case for why self-care is important, especially if you're engaged in helping others. So I'm going to refer to people as helpers as a broad term, but what I mean by that is parents, caregivers of any kind, grandparents, respite workers, teachers, teachers' assistants, therapists, absolutely anybody who gives of themselves in the care of others. And in particular, anybody who cares for others who may be having, really strong emotions, big feelings, large behaviors. So those times in particular, it's really important to make sure that we are as calm and as accessible as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to really monitor ourselves and engage in practices of self-care. Unfortunately, life often doesn't go as expected. And so we find a lot of these unplanned for bumps that happen along the way. And one thing about self-care is that practicing it, even when we don't need it, means that we have more personal resources available for those times when we do need it. As helpers, so parents, caregivers, respite workers, therapists, it's very important that we monitor our own experiences for how our role in particular is impacting us. So watching for things like compassion fatigue, so that can be that slow creeping up exhaustion that comes from giving of yourself. Or burnout, which can be a little more acute, so something that happens really quickly, maybe a lot of headaches or, before having to go to work the next day or to a shift, or sleeplessness or increased anxiety, things like that are part of burnout, as well as vicarious trauma. So sometimes when we're working with people who've had trauma and we hear some of these stories, we can also take on some of those very similar trauma symptoms. So it's very important that we monitor ourselves, that we, reflect to see what part of our role, whether it's as parent, caregiver, therapist, what part is feeling is having an impact on us. And it doesn't take away from who we are, how we do at our job. It's just that sometimes this is a great signal for needing something, right? Our feelings tell us that we need something. And so compassion fatigue or burnout, especially those early symptoms, or even vicarious trauma, they're signals that we need to take a break, that we need to do some self-care in order to fill back up our reserves and our energy. Signs of burnout to watch for include headaches or muscle tension, sleeplessness, Sunday night blues, increased feelings of cynicism or pessimism, kind of feeling really, really down about your job, feeling really depleted, like your energy gets sucked out after a shift, and that it's too much. So when the depletion, kind of the risk ends up starting to outweigh what some of the rewards are. When you're starting to feel really stressed, when you're starting to feel more irritable or be quick to lose your temper, those are some other symptoms of burnout. So it's good to always monitor that and to figure out if you can catch them in the early stages, and then do something to counteract them. So please remember, self-care is not selfish. It is actually very important. Just like a mechanic or a carpenter or any other tradesperson, they have to make sure that their instruments are calibrated and sharp and ready to use. It's the same thing when you're a helper. Whether you're a parent, therapist, respite worker, whatever it is us. It is, we are what we use in order to support the people in our lives. And so it's very important to make sure that we're monitoring how our tool is and doing things in order to take care of it, right? It's helpful to have a self-care action plan. And you may already do quite a few things for yourself, or you feel like, you've got a good handle on it, but I'm going to challenge you to try and stretch a little bit more. We're going to look at all the different kinds of self-care and then make an action plan on how you can increase or try something new to see if that adds to your repertoire of self-care activities. In our self-care action plan, we have 3 steps. The first is to make self-care a priority. The second is to figure out what works for you. And the third is to practice regularly. In the first step, making self-care a priority, it's important that we acknowledge our feelings. So when we feel tired, overwhelmed, when we feel sad, or like we just want to have some alone time, some quiet time, that's okay. That's our bodies telling us that we need to do something differently, and it's time to recharge. It's time to take a break. So it's important to do that and to listen to those. It's okay to say no. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to take some of that time that we need in order to recharge so that we can be there when needed. Feelings aren't good or bad. They're signals, they're messages to tell us of some kind of an unmet need. So for example, if we're feeling sad, we need some love. If we're feeling stressed, we might need some rest. So really it's important when you have a strong feeling or something's coming up for you, just to take some time to figure out, what does that mean? What's the need? What do I need in order to meet that feeling? Checking in with our feelings and monitoring our own kind of battery is very important when it comes to working with others. In order to help other people, we do have to have the energy available. So if we check in routinely, we can figure out how we're doing and if we might need to do something in order to increase our energy to bump ourselves up. So if we can figure out either what's draining our battery and also figure out what kind of adds to our battery so we can kind of work in balance to try and stay as charged up as we can. One of the reasons it's so important that we stay fully charged is that we give our own calm in order to help those that we're helping calm down. So we have to serve as that external support to them. So we basically are kind of giving them our calm. So the calmer we are, the more full our vessel is, the easier it is for us to share it with those who need it. So taking care of ourselves not only does it model how to take care of ourselves for the ones we're with, but it also enables us to take care of them when they need it, when they need our calm the most. More ways to fill yourself back up, to make self-care a priority, includes giving yourself permission to do that. Space to grow, the ability to say no and to set boundaries, to validate your feelings, to know that feelings are just messages, they're just signals that need to be listened to and validated. And really it's about treating yourself as if you were a friend. And so those are some of the simplest ways, speaking kindly to yourself, giving yourself praise that can recharge your battery. Step 2 of our self-care action plan is to figure out what works for you. So there's actually 8 different categories of self-care activities. And I think often we kind of fall into 1 or 2 of those categories and we may not, pick activities from across all 8. So I do invite you to take a look, Google. There's lots of different self-care assessment guides online. So take a look and you can kind of go through these 8 categories and see which ones you do and which ones you might want to try, so you can expand your repertoire. But there's a wide range, including, time management at work can be self-care, to going for a walk, self-care, or, engaging in a new hobby can definitely be self-care. So there are so many different activities, and it's helpful to start broadening, maybe if you don't do many of them, to, broaden your repertoire of self-care activities. Sometimes engaging in self-care sounds really overwhelming, especially when we're feeling particularly low. However, something as simple as getting outside for 20 minutes a day is enough to really have an impact on our mental health. I really love the idea of boring self-care. So to me, it's acknowledging anything that you've done today that has improved your well-being, your space, or anything around you. So if you changed your sheets, that's awesome. That's self-care. If you got outside, that's great. That's self-care. If you brushed your hair, that's fantastic. That's self-care. If you had a healthy meal. So those things, it's about really acknowledging the things that we do for ourselves on a daily basis. So sometimes when self-care is really hard, just acknowledge the basics. And self-care doesn't have to be time-consuming. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be something as simple as taking a 10-minute break and enjoying a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, really savoring it, focusing on it, how it feels, what the heat from the cup feels like, what the smells are like, and just really, throwing yourself into that experience. That's all it takes. That's a great 10-minute self-care break. Self-care can also be acknowledging regular routines and rituals. So ritual doesn't have to be, a formalized, structured mindfulness practice or meditation. It can also be putting on the music and doing some cleaning. So it's about, really acknowledging what you need and what fills you up, what makes you feel better. Number 3 on our self-care action plan is to practice regularly. That doesn't mean it has to be the same activity all the time. Definitely not. There are so many different ways to engage in self-care. Realistic, regular, everyday, routine kind of ways. Whether it's playing games or going for walks or stretching or, taking time to chat with a friend. There are lots of different ways that you can engage in self-care. And I think one of the ways to do that is to acknowledge that that's what you're doing. You're doing activities to find calm and rest and relaxation. So I also challenge you to do something like a 30-day challenge. So here's an example of 30 days of different activities. So some of them might be new to you. Some of them might be things that you already do. And you can actually build your own if you want, if it makes more sense. And so see if you can do something new, something for yourself every day for an entire month. Now that you have a self-care action plan, as well as a 30-day self-care challenge, I want to leave you with a little bit of information about the last kind of helpful tip. It's called self-compassion. So there's a lot of research now showing that engaging in self-compassion, so that's being kind to yourself, speaking to yourself as if you were a friend, has a lot of impact, especially on those of us in helping positions that may have a lot of stress and strain related to being helpers. So self-compassion is something where we just acknowledge that what we're going through is pretty tough and that other people are also going through tough times. So it's about that kind of common shared humanity and that it will pass. So I do invite you to take a look at self-compassion website and to find that in the extra resources. A couple of last thoughts. In summary, self-care is definitely a priority and not a luxury. Because helping is what we do, we need to be, ready, willing, and able to be that calm port for someone who might be in a storm. We need to be able to help them ride through their waves of emotion. So in order to do that, we need to take our own time in order to make sure that we are as rested and relaxed and calm as possible. And so self-care doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be expensive, it just has to fit for what you need in order to fill your battery and keep you fully charged. So whatever you do for yourself today, let that be enough. Call it boring self-care, call it practical, but take a look at those 8 different categories and challenge yourself to engage in self-care in new and expanded ways. Thank you. Take care.